I had always believed that life was about collecting wins, acquiring wealth, climbing the corporate ladder, and accumulating status until I reached the peak. My name is Maxwell Carter, and I'm a 30-year-old senior partner at one of the most prestigious law firms in New York City. By society standards, I had it all: an impressive corner office overlooking the skyline, a six-figure salary, and an apartment in a sleek downtown building. On the surface, everything looked perfect. I had worked tirelessly to achieve the success I had always envisioned, believing that the accumulation of wealth would be the final measure of my worth. But when my Aunt Eleanor passed away, her will shattered the carefully constructed life I had spent years building. It was a rainy Wednesday when I found myself sitting in a law office, the sound of raindrops tapping on the windows mixing with the cold, sterile hum of fluorescent lights above. The marble floors gleamed in a way that felt almost clinical, and the air was thick with the smell of old paper and leather. I sat across from Mr. Campbell, the lawyer who had represented Aunt Eleanor for as long as I could remember. His face was one I had grown familiar with over the years, but today it looked different, like he had something important to say, something that would change everything. His glasses perched precariously on the end of his nose as he opened the envelope containing Aunt Eleanor's will. I could feel the weight of the moment, the anticipation of what was to come. "To my dear nephew, Maxwell," Mr. Campbell began, his voice slow and deliberate, "I leave you one last inheritance, but it is not the fortune you expect." The words hung in the air, and for a brief second I thought I had misheard him. My stomach dropped. I had been preparing myself for the kind of inheritance that would secure my future for good, money that would allow me to expand my firm, grow my personal wealth, and give me the freedom to live life on my own terms. Instead, I was left in a state of confusion. What could she have possibly left me? I leaned forward, the faint click of my suit jacket's button breaking the silence. "What exactly is it?" I asked, though I wasn't sure if I really wanted to know. Mr. Campbell glanced down at the paper, clearing his throat. "I leave you my 1992 Ford Mustang, along with a small wooden box. Inside this box, you will find 5 sealed letters. You are to deliver these letters to the recipients they are addressed to. You must complete this task before you will have access to the full trust." My mind raced. A 1992 Mustang? Was this some sort of joke? That rust bucket, that old car, was all I was getting? I could already feel the frustration building inside me. I had imagined this moment countless times, picturing myself receiving a substantial sum, enough to propel me forward into a new phase of life. But here I was, staring at the faded image of a Mustang I had seen only in the rearview mirror of more successful cars, the symbol of everything I was trying to leave behind. I blinked in disbelief, trying to process what I had just heard. This couldn't be real. My aunt was never one for grand gestures or expensive gifts. But this felt like a slap in the face. I glanced at the lawyer, waiting for him to say something that would make sense of it all. But he remained silent, his eyes trained on the paper in front of him. Mr. Campbell continued reading, almost as if he hadn't noticed my growing confusion. "The $5 million in the trust is contingent upon your successful delivery of these letters, Maxwell. No letter, no access to the funds." I couldn't believe it. My heart sank further. It was clear now that this wasn't about the money. It was about some task I had to complete. 5 letters to 5 strangers? It sounded absurd. I had no time for sentimental games. My life was about efficiency, about making the right moves at the right time. The idea that my aunt had left me such a strange, irrelevant assignment made my stomach churn. I sighed, leaning back in my chair, trying to hide my frustration. "I don't have time for this," I muttered under my breath. But it didn't matter. There was nothing I could do to change the terms of the will. The trust was locked in place, and if I wanted the money, I had to play along. My hands were tied. The lawyer handed me the keys to the Mustang, and I reluctantly took them. The car was sitting in the private garage downstairs, a relic from a past I couldn't relate to. I wanted to reject it, to tell him to keep it all, but I couldn't. At least not until I had what was rightfully mine. I stood up, the weight of the situation settling heavily on my shoulders. The life I had spent years building, the one where wealth and success defined me, suddenly felt empty. I hadn't even begun this bizarre journey, and already my world felt like it was slipping out of my grasp. With the keys to the car in my hand, I walked out of the lawyer's office, stepping into the cool, damp air of the city. The Mustang, old, tired, and unremarkable, sat in front of me. As I slid into the driver's seat, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I thought I knew about life was about to change. This wasn't the path I had planned for myself, but it was the one I had to follow. The car's engine sputtered to life, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was going somewhere I didn't understand. The journey ahead would test me in ways I couldn't yet fathom, but I had no choice but to begin. I drove for hours, the engine of the 1992 Mustang struggling to keep up with the fast-paced thoughts racing in my head. The old car creaked and groaned as I headed toward the small town in Pennsylvania where the first letter was addressed. At first, I couldn't understand why my aunt would do this to me, why she had set up this bizarre scavenger hunt. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I had worked hard for everything I had, and now I was being forced to play some sentimental game. What could a letter possibly mean in comparison to the millions that should have been mine by right? It was absurd. But despite my frustration, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something deeper was happening. Maybe this journey was more than just about getting the money. As much as I hated to admit it, my curiosity started to creep in. What was in these letters? And why did my aunt, of all people, want me to deliver them to strangers? I finally reached my destination, a small, dusty town where the streets seemed to have been forgotten by time. The first address led me to Isaac Coleman's auto repair shop. The place looked run down, the faded sign above the door barely legible. I parked the Mustang outside, stepping out into the cool air and feeling the weight of the car's history settling on my shoulders. This was not the glamorous, fast-paced world I was used to. It felt like I had stepped into another era entirely. Isaac, a wiry man in his late 50s, was bent over a car engine in the back of the shop. His hands, calloused and stained with grease, moved with practiced precision, completely focused on the task at hand. When I approached him, I could see the surprise in his eyes. He didn't expect a visitor, especially not one with a letter in hand. "I'm looking for Isaac Coleman," I said, my voice sounding more official than I intended. "You found him," Isaac replied, wiping his hands on a rag. His voice was rough but warm, and I could tell immediately he was no stranger to hard work. "What can I do for you?" I handed him the letter. His expression changed as he took it, his fingers trembling slightly as he broke the seal. His face softened as he read, and for the first time since I had entered the shop, I saw a flicker of emotion in his eyes. I felt a pang of unease. This wasn't just a simple letter. It was affecting him deeply. "I didn't expect to hear from her again," Isaac muttered, more to himself than to me. He wiped a tear from the corner of his eye, and my discomfort deepened. Isaac went on to explain that my aunt, Eleanor, had helped him years ago when his shop was on the brink of shutting down. After a devastating accident, he was left struggling, unable to afford the repairs he needed to get his business back on track. Eleanor, without hesitation, had loaned him the money he needed to rebuild. No strings attached. It was an anonymous act of kindness that had kept him going, and now, decades later, he was standing in front of me, holding the letter that confirmed her ongoing support. "The loan she gave me, it changed everything," Isaac said, his voice thick with emotion. "If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be here today. I don't know what I would have done." My mind reeled. I had never known this side of my aunt. The woman I had always seen as somewhat detached and eccentric, someone who didn't quite fit into the world I occupied, had quietly helped countless people. I had been so focused on my own ambitions that I had never once stopped to think about the impact she might have had on others. It felt like a punch to the gut, an awakening that I wasn't prepared for. Isaac handed me the letter and said, "This is the final gift she left me. She paid off the mortgage for the shop." The words felt surreal as I took the letter from his hand. It wasn't just a simple inheritance. It was a deeply personal act that showed how much my aunt cared for those around her, how she had used her resources to make a difference in the lives of people like Isaac. I stood there for a moment, trying to find the right words, but nothing came. I had no idea how to respond to something so intimate, so full of grace. I felt like an outsider in my own family, as if I had missed something fundamental about the woman who had raised me. Isaac looked at me with a gentle smile. "She was a good woman, Maxwell. You should be proud of her." I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I was proud or simply overwhelmed by everything I had learned in such a short time. The car, the letters, none of it made sense to me at first. But now, as I stood in that small, grease-scented shop, I could feel the weight of my aunt's legacy pressing down on me. She had given me more than just financial inheritance. She had given me a lesson in kindness, in how to truly live. I left Isaac's shop feeling a mixture of awe and confusion. What had I been expecting from this journey? I hadn't known. But as I got back into the Mustang and started the engine, I realized that the road ahead wasn't just about delivering letters. It was about something much more profound. Eleanor had left me a map, not to her wealth, but to her heart. And as I drove away, I couldn't help but wonder what the next letter would reveal. What more could I possibly learn about the woman I thought I knew? I woke up the next morning, the weight of the previous day's encounter still lingering in my mind. I had barely slept, my thoughts spiraling around the unexpected impact of Isaac's story. Eleanor, my aunt, the woman I had always thought of as a bit of an eccentric, had clearly been far more than that. I had spent so much of my life chasing the idea of success through wealth, thinking that it would bring me fulfillment. But now I was confronted with a much deeper question. What had Eleanor really wanted for me? Was this journey about the money, or was it something else entirely? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to continue. The second letter was waiting for me, tucked inside the wooden box that had started to feel more like a puzzle box than a keepsake. The next stop on my journey led me to Brooklyn, New York. The address on the envelope directed me to a small artist's studio in a neighborhood that felt both vibrant and a little rough around the edges. As I walked toward the studio, I could hear the sounds of street musicians and the chatter of people enjoying the sunshine. This wasn't the world I was used to, a world filled with polished offices and high-rise buildings, but there was something undeniable about it. It felt alive in a way that the world I knew never did. The studio itself was tucked between a couple of trendy cafes and a vintage record shop. The walls were plastered with colorful artwork, canvases piled against one another, and supplies scattered around. The smell of paint and creativity filled the air as I stepped inside. The woman I was looking for, Clara Henderson, was sitting at an easel, her brush moving fluidly across the canvas. She didn't notice me at first, so I took a moment to just watch her work. She was in her mid-30s, with dark curly hair tied up in a messy bun, her face focused and peaceful as she created something that seemed to come alive with each stroke. When she finally noticed me, she paused, wiping her hands on a rag. Her eyes studied me for a moment, her expression wary but not unfriendly. I must have looked out of place standing there in my tailored suit, holding a small wooden box. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice calm but curious. "I'm Maxwell Carter," I said, stepping forward. "I was asked to deliver this letter to you." Her face flickered with recognition, and a quiet smile spread across her lips. She took the letter from me, her fingers brushing against mine briefly. I could feel the hesitation in her, as if this letter meant something more than just words on a page. She broke the seal and began to read, her face softening as she did. It was a strange sight. A woman who, just moments ago, was lost in her art, now becoming emotionally still, completely absorbed in the contents of the letter. "I knew she was behind that donation," Clara said, almost to herself, letting out a soft laugh. "I always thought my anonymous patron was Eleanor." Clara went on to explain that she had been struggling as an artist, barely making enough money to pay the bills and keep the studio running. She had been on the verge of giving up, thinking about selling her paints and brushes to get a real job when, out of nowhere, Eleanor had stepped in. My aunt had funded her first gallery exhibition, a show that had launched her career and allowed her to continue doing what she loved. "I didn't know how I would keep going," Clara said, her voice thick with gratitude. "But Eleanor, she saw something in me. She believed in my work, even when I didn't. That exhibition was everything." I stood there, listening, feeling something inside me shift again. I had no idea. All this time, I had thought of my aunt as someone who was always a little detached from the world around her. She was kind, but I had never seen the depth of her generosity or the way she quietly empowered others to pursue their dreams. It was humbling, almost overwhelming, to hear Clara speak so highly of her. The letter Clara held was not just an act of charity, it was a confirmation of Eleanor's faith in her. The letter contained the deed to her studio, fully paid for. Clara now had a permanent space to create and to live her passion, a gift that went far beyond a simple donation. It was an investment in her future. "I don't know what I would have done without her," Clara said softly. "This is more than just money. It's the chance to build my life the way I've always wanted to." I nodded, unable to find words. The power of what I was witnessing, the kind of quiet, lasting impact Eleanor had on people's lives, was something I hadn't fully understood until now. Eleanor didn't just give away her money. She gave people the opportunity to grow, to thrive, and to make something of themselves. It was so far from the transactional world I was used to. In that moment, I realized that this was what true wealth looked like. It wasn't about the bank account numbers or the flashy cars or the corner office. It was about making a difference in the lives of others, about investing in people and their potential. As I left the artist's studio, Clara's smile still fresh in my mind, I felt a little lighter, a little more awake. The Mustang, with its old leather seats and cracked dashboard, had somehow become less of an inconvenience and more of a reminder. It wasn't just a car. It was a symbol of the journey I was on, a journey that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with understanding what truly mattered in life. I climbed back into the car, the sun beginning to set over Brooklyn, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was headed in the right direction. The road ahead was still unclear, but I was beginning to see it more as a path of discovery than a pointless errand. Eleanor had a plan for me, one I hadn't understood, but I was starting to. I still had 3 letters left to deliver, and I couldn't help but wonder what more I would learn about my aunt, and more importantly, about myself. The next morning, I woke up feeling a strange sense of purpose, like the journey was no longer just about delivering letters. It was about uncovering pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known existed. After the encounter with Clara, I realized that my Aunt Eleanor had quietly shaped the lives of so many people, investing in their futures in ways I had never imagined. It was a far cry from the transactional, cutthroat world I lived in, and yet it felt more meaningful than anything I had ever achieved in my career. The next letter was addressed to someone named Tom Edwards in a retirement community in Florida. As I prepared for the next leg of the journey, I tried to quiet my doubts. I had no idea what I would encounter next, but I had started to feel that this wasn't just some strange, posthumous game. It was my aunt's final lesson for me, a lesson I hadn't yet fully understood. The drive down to Florida felt long, stretching through endless highways that seemed to blur together. It was a different kind of distance than the one I was used to in the city. This one felt slower, more deliberate. By the time I arrived at the retirement community, the sky had already started to dim, and the air was thick with the kind of quiet that only comes in the later hours of the evening. The building where Tom Edwards lived was old but well kept, its whitewashed exterior glowing in the soft light. I walked up to the door of his apartment, my mind racing with questions. Who was Tom Edwards? Why had my aunt included him on this strange list of recipients? What could he possibly have to do with the woman I had known as my aunt? When Tom opened the door, I was taken aback. He was in his late 70s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that had seen decades of both success and failure. His hair was graying, and his eyes held a sharpness that didn't match the quiet surroundings of the retirement community. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking, his voice gravelly but not unkind. "You must be Maxwell," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "Come on in. I assume you have a letter for me." I handed him the envelope, and he took it with a knowing look, as if he had been expecting this moment for some time. He tore open the seal and began to read. As he read, I could see the muscles in his face twitching, a combination of nostalgia and something deeper, more painful. When he finished, he looked up at me, his expression unreadable. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered under his breath. He sat down slowly on the couch, the weight of the letter in his hands. I stood there, unsure of what to do or say, but I knew I had to ask. "You knew her, didn't you?" I asked. "What's the story?" Tom looked up at me, his eyes hardening for a moment before softening again. "Eleanor and I," he started, shaking his head with a half-sad smile, "we were business rivals. We used to be fierce competitors in the commercial real estate market. I don't know if you ever knew this, but she beat me in one of the biggest deals of my career. Took everything I had, my company, my future." He paused, his gaze drifting to the window, as though the memory was too painful to relive. "I lost everything," he continued. "It was a brutal time. I was angry, bitter. The kind of man who couldn't see past the next deal, the next win. And then a few years later, Eleanor found me." He chuckled softly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "She didn't come to gloat. She came with a proposition." I sat down across from him, intrigued. "What did she want?" "She bought an old building in this town, said she wanted to turn it into a place for at-risk youth, kids who didn't have anywhere else to go, but there was one condition. She wanted me to run it." I blinked, trying to process what I was hearing. "She wanted you to run it after everything that happened between you?" Tom nodded slowly. "Yeah," she said, "I always respected you, Tom. You were a fighter. Now it's time to fight for something that actually matters." He let out a heavy sigh, rubbing his hand over his face. "I thought she was crazy, but I couldn't turn it down. And damn it, it changed my life. I didn't just have a second chance. I had a purpose. The community center became my reason to get up every day, to keep going. And that was Eleanor. She didn't just want to win, she wanted people to win, even if it meant helping her competitors along the way." I sat back in my chair, absorbing his words. Eleanor hadn't just been a kind woman. She had been strategic, giving people like Tom a chance to redeem themselves, not just financially, but emotionally, to build a life that actually mattered. This was the second time I had encountered a person who had been given a second chance through Eleanor's generosity. I hadn't expected this, hadn't expected that Eleanor's compassion would extend even to someone who had once been her fiercest rival. "What did the letter say?" I asked, my voice low. Tom's face softened as he glanced down at the letter in his hand. "The letter, it's a donation to the center, Maxwell. A large one, enough to keep it running for the next 20 years at least. She set up an endowment fund that will ensure these kids have a place to go long after I'm gone." I sat in stunned silence for a moment. The center was a lifeline to the community, and now, thanks to Eleanor, it would endure for years to come. She had given Tom the chance to turn his life around, but she had also given him the resources to help others turn theirs around too. I stood to leave, but Tom stopped me. "Maxwell," he said, his voice rough, "your aunt was a hell of a woman. She wasn't just kind. She was smart. She gave me the opportunity to make something of myself. She didn't just fix things with a check. She gave people the chance to fix their own lives." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle on me. Eleanor had left me more than just money. She had left me a legacy of understanding what really mattered. And that, I was beginning to realize, was far more valuable than anything I had ever chased before. In life, true success isn't measured by the amount of wealth or status we accumulate, but by the impact we have on others. The story of Maxwell and his Aunt Eleanor teaches us that generosity, kindness, and the ability to lift others up are the most valuable qualities we can cultivate. Eleanor's legacy wasn't just about giving money. It was about investing in people's futures, offering second chances, and using resources to create opportunities for others. The advice here is simple. Don't focus solely on what you can acquire, but rather on what you can give. Life isn't just about collecting wins or material possessions. It's about building relationships, helping others grow, and leaving a meaningful impact. When we focus on lifting those around us, we enrich not only their lives, but our own. Invest in the well-being of others, offer help without expecting anything in return, and be willing to give others the chance to succeed. True fulfillment comes when we measure success by how much we contribute to the world and the lives we touch, rather than the wealth we amass.